Māori in Australia. Now, there are obviously two major Māori populations on the planet, one being in Aotearoa, the other being here in Aotearoa. There's a whole bunch of census data that says there's something like 150 to 200,000 people in Australia that identify as being Māori. So they're the two major Māori populations. And I kind of look at this and think of it like two major cities that are some geographic distance apart, and as those cities grow over time, they actually get closer and closer to one another. And you can kind of think about that in terms of these two populations. They're not going to shrink. They're not going to go away. They're only going to grow. That includes the population in Australia. And what I'm kind of stuck on, I don't really have an answer to this question. I don't even think I've got a question. I'm just thinking out loud. As these two populations grow, they eventually need to join together somehow. And I don't think that has been figured out. I don't think, excuse my little companion here, I don't think that's been figured out, and I've never even heard someone talk about it before. But as these populations grow, how do they better connect with one another? The intent of this Marae project in Sydney is an effort to sort of bridge that gap, to connect people. And there's, other than the contention around it, my apologies again, other than the contention around it, like the intent, that is the intent of it, whether you agree with it or not. And I think there's a whole bunch of other ways, other avenues that can be explored to try and connect those two populations that will eventually grow. Like, what's it gonna be like in 200 years' time? We're all still gonna be here. We're gonna have bigger and bigger populations, and it's the seeds that we plant today that are going to benefit people in the future. So how do we do it? I'm not really sure. There's lots of different issues. There's lots of different things that we can talk about and explore. There's obviously culture, there's iwi, there's hapu, there's going to be people within those small groups that they're going to grow and grow and grow, and they'll come to Australia and they'll grow and grow and grow, and there's employment, there's finances, there's business, there's social issues. Like, you often hear, come back home, just come back home, which I agree with 100%. But coming back home is not always a reality for people. It's not always something that people can even do, on a yearly basis. Some people just don't have the capacity to do that. So if you're kind of, for lack of a better term, stuck here in Australia, this is where your permanent roots are for now, then how does that get fostered from Aotearoa, and then how does Aotearoa, hey, shh, and then vice versa. And I'm not talking about this take relationship. I'm talking about like a symbiotic relationship that goes both ways. Hey, shh, oh my gosh, don't play. Like, I think there's other cultures that have got this right. I think the Chinese have probably got it right. I think the Indians have probably got it right. The Greeks. Just by the level of influence that you see from those peoples, from those ethnicities in Australia. There's obviously a lot of issues and areas to navigate around, apologies again, around integrating with Indigenous Australians. There's plenty of Māori kids here. There's plenty of Māori adults that are Indigenous as well. That are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Like, it's just I think it's just a space that should be talked about more. How can we foster the growth? Because the growth is going to happen whether you like it or not. Whether you have a straight line view that, people should just come back home. You hear it all the time. Oh, simple answer, just come back home. It's not always that simple. And there's two populations that are going to grow across Aotearoa and across Australia. And I just wonder what a future looks like where both of those populations are well looked after, are connected, are working together to some sort of, common goals, where there is some sort of, I don't know. How do we benefit both populations? Interested to hear your thoughts.